everyone, and welcome to another Fresh Fiction Video Book Club. I'm Samantha T, and today's guest is Jeff Zentner, who is here to talk about his debut novel in the adult market, Colton Gentry's Third Act. Welcome, Jeff. It's great to see you.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Jeff, to get things started, for some of our readers that are new to you, especially since this is your debut novel for the adults, tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get started writing? Because you've had an interesting journey to get to this point.
Yeah, I sure have. Well, first, an introduction. My name's Jeff Zentner. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I actually live in Vince Gill's first house in Nashville. So you can see here by the size of the room I'm in, he's upgraded considerably since. But there's a little bit of country music history in the room that I speak to you from. So I am the author of 4 books for young adults. Grab copies here to show you. The Serpent King, Goodbye Days, Rain and Delilah's Midnight Matinee, and In the Wild Light. And my writing journey had a lot of twists and turns. I basically grew up in a pre-internet era. So it was very difficult to know what kind of people became authors. And I met my first published author when I was 33. So becoming an author wasn't the first thing that occurred to me. I imagined authors as these mythical, magical creatures that lived in ivory towers, and that's who was writing books. It wasn't people like me. So when the time came to become an artist, to fulfill that hunger of creating art, I became a musician instead, and moved to Nashville in my early 20s and had a go at making it as a professional musician. And when that hadn't panned out by about age 33, that's when I realized that it was time to probably look for some other way to occupy my time, because I probably wasn't going to make it as a professional musician. So I started volunteering at a music camp for teenagers called Tennessee Teen Rock Camp. And this was a really amazing experience. And through volunteering with these young musicians, I really fell in love with the way that young adults love the art that they love. It's a really special, beautiful thing, the connection they forge with it, and the way they let it become a part of them, the way they make it part of their identity. It's really cool. And it made me want to make art for young adults. But of course, at that point that I'm having this realization, I'm like 36 years old. I'm way too old to be making the kind of music that young adults tend to consume. So I start looking around for something else that I can do to reach young adults with art. And I eventually land on books, because I realized that there's this big category of books called young adult books. And also I realized that you don't have to be younger than age 30 to write books. Many celebrated authors have had their debuts well into their 50s, 60s even. So writing books was something I could do. So I came up with an idea for a novel, and I ended up writing it on my phone on the bus to and from work, just with my right thumb. That was the writing time I had available to me. So I'd just type away on my way into the office. And I did that with my first 4 books. And then I got an idea for a book that wouldn't fit in the young adult realm. Mr. Colton Gentry started speaking to me in my mind and said, "Hey, man, I'd like you to tell my story." And I said, "Okay, what's your deal?" And he said, "Well, first off, I'm 38. And I said, "Whoa, I'm going to stop you right there. This is going to have to be a very different kind of book, because you can't sell a YA book with a 38-year-old protagonist." He said, "Well, I'm just going to tell you my story and you see what you can do about it." So that's when I knew that I had the makings of my first adult book. So yeah, that's kind of my story in a real abbreviated nutshell.
Well, in a way, I mean, this is kind of your third act then too, going from the musician songwriter to YA novelist to now releasing your first adult romance even. How what has been the most surprising thing to you out of this journey?
Well, first off, that's a very astute observation. I mean, I am fond of saying that this book isn't just Colton Gentry's third act, it's Jeff Zentner's third act too. The most surprising thing to me is how many brand new readers I've encountered. I assumed that 99% of my readers for this book would be my young adult readers, because most of my young adult readers um, were and are adults, and a lot of my readers from my early books who read them as young adults are now adults, because my first couple books came out in 2016, 2017. So if you're a 16-year-old in 2016, 2017, you're an adult now, right? And you're ready to read adult books. So I just assumed that all of my readership would be former YA readers of mine. And I have been very pleasantly surprised to find that not to be the case. I've just gotten back from another run of tour, and lots of folks in those crowds who had not read any of my books before. Colton Gentry is my first book. So that has surprised me a little bit.
Well, and the thing I also love with this story, I mean, it is a tale of second chances and how he's evolving. But there's elements, I think, also from your YA stories, which they're usually going through. This is going to sound a little bit trite, and I don't mean it to be, but I mean, they're going through their various trials and tribulations. And that's what Colton is having to go through also as he's moving through these different stages. How much of that is a conscious that you're really trying to delve into those same themes of love and loss and death as people are having to reconcile where they are and how they're going to move forward? And is any of that also being pulled from your history as a songwriter?
Well, that is all a very conscious choice to have sort of a thematic through line from my YA books to Colton Gentry. One of the really valuable things I learned as a musician is that I can like all kinds of music. Truly, from rap to country to new age to 80s goth to whatever. I love all kinds of music. But I learned that there's a kind of music that I make. There's a kind of story that I tell when I go to tell stories through art. There is a voice I speak with. There is an emotional register and an emotional palette that I work with. Uh, so I knew that I needed to seek that in my writing first for young adults, right? So I really didn't start writing until I knew what kind of stories I told. And so it was the same thing for adult books. I was just going to carry that through line. I'm not going to suddenly write horror novels or whatever. I love horror novels, don't get me wrong, but that's not the kind of story I tell, right? I tell a different kind of story. And so I knew I needed to tell that in the adult realm. Now I did do something to where when I was moving from music into writing young adult fiction, I kept one little foot in the musical realm by having the main character of my book be a musician. And that kind of grounded me. That gave me a safe sort of platform from which to dive into young adult fiction. Similar with Colton Gentry, where a decent portion of this book is told in flashback to when Colton is a teenager. I snuck a little YA novella into Colton Gentry's third act. But what I got to do in Colton Gentry is something that I've never gotten to do in any of my YA books, which is write a YA story and then write the sequel to the YA story in the same book. That's what Colton's got. It's got a teenage story. It's got a little mini coming of age story, a mini teenage love story, but it's also got the sequel to that story within the pages of the same book. So that was really a lot of fun to do, and that was a conscious choice. It had worked for me to make that leap from songwriting to YA with one foot in the musical realm, and I hoped it would work for me again, making the jump from YA to adult with one foot in the YA realm.
Well, and with this book jumping between those different time periods, how was your writing process with that? Did you write one section or were you having to bounce between them? And if you were bouncing, how did you keep everything straight?
So I wrote the book basically as you see it, right? So present day, flashback, present day, flashback. Um, Pretty much as you've got the book is how I wrote it in that order. I did go back on my editor's advice and add in the sections where we see Colton hanging out with Dwayne. So we get to know Colton's friend Dwayne better. We get to see scenes of them interacting, which is really important because you need to understand what Dwayne meant to Colton to understand why Colton sets his life on fire in the opening pages. You need to understand the depth of his feeling for this man Dwayne, the love he had for him, to understand why he was coming apart at the seams the way he was.
And what was the initial inspiration with this book? Because there, with these different parts, it's like, well, was it the evolution of Colton? Was it the romance and his rekindling things with Luann, or was it the cancel culture element of where he set his current life aflame essentially, which then caused him to go back home? What was that initial spark for you?
So the initial spark for me was I really love second chance romances. I love stories about two people who just can't escape each other's orbit, whether they want to or not. I love stories like that. That to me is very romantic. The idea that fate will sometimes put two people together and circumstance will pull them apart, but fate will say, nah, I put you all together for a reason, and it keeps pushing them back together. To me, I love those kind of love stories. I think they're wonderful. And so I wanted to write one of those. Um, I thought at the same time, I thought it would be interesting to write a book about somebody whose life falls apart and they have to move back home and rebuild their life. A TV show that I really loved that aired years ago, a few years ago, was called Rectify, and it's not a well-known show at all. I think it might be streaming on Netflix. It originally aired on the Sundance Channel, and it's about a guy who was falsely accused of a murder, who is cleared and exonerated and moves back home to try to rebuild his life. And I love this show, Rectify. And I said, I want to do my version of that story. Um, and I thought about, how can I have my character get canceled and you still be on his side? Because a lot of times when people in the public eye are getting canceled, it's for horrible things, awful, you know, being creeps and whatnot. So that led me into thinking about country music, which is both a genre of music that I love. Obviously, it's near and dear to my heart. Living in Nashville, it's an important part of my city, and I love my city. I love the artistic culture here. Um, uh, and it is part of the fabric of life in the South. And I write Southern lit. I write Southern fiction. And you can get yourself canceled in country music for things that a lot of people wouldn't think make you a bad person at all. Think about Natalie Maines of the Dixie Chicks. What she said to get herself canceled, a lot of real decent people agreed with. It wasn't like she, said something racist or, got handsy with somebody or something like that to get herself canceled. She expressed an opinion that a lot of real decent folks agreed with, but it got her canceled from country music. So all of those elements kind of started to combine in my mind, and I said, okay, we got a guy who's canceled and comes home, and he's got to be a country musician if I want to have this work right. And then second chance romance. Okay, so when he comes home, maybe he meets somebody, and then in comes the food element, because what I'll do sometimes is I'll scratch an itch in a book. So in this book, my last YA book to come out, there's a chef character in this book, and there's a little bit of food talk. There was more food talk, but I had to edit it out for length. So I said, you know what? I didn't quite scratch the itch in this book. So I needed to scratch the itch more. And I said, food. We can work food into this. That can be part of the second chance. That can be part of the canceled because Colton's going to need a job. When these pieces all start coming together in your mind, it is a thing of beauty and it all just works. That's when you know a book wants to be a story that needs to be told.
Well, and the other element I'm also confused about, because let's face it, there's not a lot of men writing romance. There are some, but what was it like when you were pitching this and saying, yes, I want to write a second chance romance? I want to have that love story inherent in my book.
Well, first of all, I did not I didn't feel like I had the right to call it a romance for a long time. I have only started calling it a second chance romance after I've been given permission to by some really amazing romance readers. Kathy Berner, who is an amazing bookseller out at Blue Willow Bookshop in Houston. I got to shout her out because she was the first, even before my editor or anybody on my publicity team, she was the first to call it a second chance romance. And I just wrote a love story. I didn't really know the conventions of romance well. That there are specific beats in a romance like you really got to hit. And so I was very leery to call it a romance, not because I look down on romance in any way. I love romance, but because I wasn't sure that I'd hit those beats. And woe unto you if you mislead a romance reader. You don't want to do that. So that was the last thing I wanted to do. So I initially conceived of it as just heartfelt contemporary Southern fiction with a love story at the center of it. That's how I conceived of it. Um, and yes, I agree. There are not very many men writing in that space. Um, just like there aren't very many men writing in the YA space. I like to be different and unusual and I don't know. I write the stories that resonate with me and I was feeling like telling a very, very tender and hopeful story because we've seen a lot of awful things in the world. I've seen a lot of awful things. I spent almost a decade as a prosecutor for the state of Tennessee. So in my whole story, there's me going to law school in there and then becoming a prosecutor. So I saw a lot of really horrible things, and I'd gotten my fill of the horribleness of life and the horribleness of this world. And so when I go to tell stories, I tend to want to tell a very tender, hopeful story that leaves you feeling good. To me, that's a very worthwhile goal. Again, I'll read a hopeless story. I'll read a depressing story and enjoy it. I'm fine with those kind of stories. I think those stories should exist. I love them. I think they're great. But again, when I go to tell a story, there's a kind of story that I tell, and this is the kind of story that felt right for me to tell at this time.
So this is so interesting for the legal background also. I mean, there's so many authors that we talk to who in their day job at some point they have practiced law, and knowing all of just how much writing goes along with that type of position anyway. But then on the flip side, having the background as a songwriter and a musician, again, not as many, but I think for the another author that we've talked to is Zio Axelrod, who's also a musician. She's talked about how that songwriting aspect and the musicians helps gives her a different ear of as far as the word choice and her almost the musicality of the language that she uses. And from other lawyers, it seems the word choice comes into play in a different style. How do you feel that's incorporated into your novel writing? Or do you think it's still yet another element that comes into play?
Yeah, so I agree with the author you spoke with, who was a songwriter, that I do think about sentences and word flow in terms of the musicality of the language, in terms of how a sentence sings to me, how it lands on my ear is all very important to me. So I think about it like that. I think about mood. I used to think about mood a lot in my music and the way that I could evoke a certain mood through the choices I made in my music. And I definitely try to do that in my writing. Over on the legal side, as lawyers, we are trained to write in a very clear and precise and concise way that allows a very busy person to quickly grasp what you're trying to say and be on your side, right? So I use those principles of writing a lot in fiction, where same deal. You're presenting stories, and by the way, so much of my legal career was storytelling because I was a prosecutor, I was a litigator, and I would have to tell stories. I would have to take evidence gathered in a criminal investigation and synthesize it into a cohesive story and a story that was compelling enough to win my case. So you're telling stories, you're using clear and concise and precise language to convey meaning, to convey story, to convey purpose, to bring somebody over onto your side. And so I certainly use those those skills a lot in novel writing.
Well, Jeff, I want to switch over to what we call our fresh fiction facts. These are a series of rapid fire questions, answers off the top of your head. Okay.
Okay.
We'll start off with something kind of easy. Who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
An elevator repairman. Who would I most want to be stuck in? I mean, MacGyver, right? This is a reference I think I can use with this crowd. I can't use it when I go speak to high schools anymore. They don't know who MacGyver is, but is this a safe space to
Oh,
invoke the name of
that's
MacGyver? Well, I'll take MacGyver
definitely
then.
yes. MacGyver or even Richard Dean Anderson. Hey, I would be okay with him even, Come on, let's
As listen, as long as he brings his MacGyver skill set. If he doesn't bring the MacGyver skill set, the only thing we're going to have to talk about is the fact that both of our middle names are Dean.
as a musician, what is your favorite instrument to play?
Guitar. I was a guitar player and I loved playing the guitar. I still love playing the guitar. I don't do it often anymore. But I loved playing the guitar, and specifically I loved playing the slide guitar.
You've been kidnapped, but 2 hours later, you're returned because you will not stop talking about what?
The TV show Friday Night Lights. I won't stop talking about Friday Night Lights.
Okay, I can go with that. Yep, football. Okay, what luxury item can you just not live without?
What luxury item can I not live without? Um, I love scented candles. I'm a big scented candle lover. I consider them a luxury item in as much as they're not something that you need. They don't fulfill any basic need. They're just fun and luxurious. I've got one burning in the background right there. And I just love them. I have dozens of them in my house. I'll have two, three going at the same time. And I don't buy expensive ones because I do burn through them so quickly. But I try to get nice ones. I think I have good taste in candles. So I'm a big scented candle fan. That's a luxury item I wouldn't want to be without.
A more nature type sense, or are you more on the foodie trend?
Oh, I like nature type scents. I'm a big cedar. I love pine candles. I'll burn a pine candle year round because I don't think pine is just a winter scent, especially here in Tennessee, where if you go hiking in a forest like one of our pine forests, that there's just that beautiful scent of pine in that humid summer air. I love that smell. So I'll burn pine candles year round, sure.
What is something that will immediately take you out of a story?
Bad dialogue will immediately take me out of a story. And I'll tell you one specific thing. I teach dialogue workshops, and there's a specific thing that drives me crazy, and it's when characters say each other's names to each other too much. Uh, Jeff, hi, how are you? Good, Susan. How are you? I'm good, Jeff. I didn't sleep well last night. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan. That's too. It's very weird and stilted, and a lot of beginning dialogue writers do that. And I also get taken out of a story by unrealistic um motions and descriptions of motions, like when there are characters winking at each other a lot. That's a really common thing in YA, is characters winking at each other. People don't wink very much at all. I can't remember the last time I ever winked at somebody. It's just, that's not a natural motion. Like, it's weird. So that'll take me out of a story. I know those sound nitpicky, but I encounter those things a lot, and they will pull me right out.
What is your most dog-eared or reread copy of a book?
Ooh, good question. I'm sorry, I'm looking on my shelves here to see if I've got it around. Um, all of my Roald Dahl books from when I was a little kid are read just about to the point of disintegration. I've got a copy of Danny the Champion of the World that is like hanging on for dear life. It's basically like book-shaped vapor now.
Would you want to go back in time to meet your ancestors or travel into the future to meet your descendants?
Ooh, wow. That's a tough one. I worry about seeing the future. I worry about it being depressing. So maybe I'd want to meet. Well, the thing is, very few of my ancestors spoke English, so there'd be a real language barrier. So I'm going with descendants. We'll go with descendants. I'll just bite the bullet and,
Okay.
whatever. Yeah, whatever happens, happens.
What is something other than books that you own a ridiculous amount of?
Well, I already spoiled it a little bit, but scented candles. Also, I own more cast iron skillets than probably anybody needs to. One of my really one of our family's favorite stories is I was on a real cast iron collecting kick, and my wife said, Jeff, I'm sorry, no more. Like, we can't do anymore, because vintage cast iron, you can't just pile up in a cabinet. Like, it's got to be out on display. And so she said, no more. So I'm like, okay. So I go to the mall with my 3-year-old son. Okay, we like to walk around the mall. He likes to get his little pretzel bites. So we go on walks when the weather's bad. So we go to the mall just to walk around and get him his pretzel bites. And while we're at the mall, I stop into Williams Sonoma, because I love to go into Williams Sonoma, because I do love to cook. That's in Colton Gentry. So we're in Williams Sonoma, and I'm looking at the Le Creuset cookware, and my son says to me, Daddy, you can't buy a new pan, I promise. And that is one of our family's favorite stories. Daddy, you can't buy a new pan, I promise. And I turned to him and I said, you know what, kiddo? You're right. I can't buy a new pan. Mama will kill me if I buy a new pan. So you're correct to promise me that.
So, are you with so many? Do you regularly use them for cooking? And are you cooking with them in the kitchen? Or are they mostly for camping out? Or what's kind of the mix?
I do cook with them regularly. I've windowed my collection down to 3 now, and I use all of them regularly. And they perform perfectly. They're all from either the 1950s or the 1940s, and I mean, they just perform as well as any brand new pan from Walmart.
What's the craziest thing that you've bought online?
What's the craziest thing I've bought online?
And with the age, because we're the same, it could it still be something, one of those as seen on TV type commercials. So online or from a commercial.
Yeah. Huh. I I wish I had a better answer for this question. I just don't. I'm trying to think if there's some piece of odd memorabilia I bought online. I don't have a real crazy one. I bought a cast iron skillet from 1917. That's not very crazy, but I'm afraid that's the best I've got. I kind of just buy I buy books, I buy clothes, I buy almost all my clothes thrifted online. I haven't owned a new piece of clothing in I don't know how long. So um yeah, I'm like looking around my writing studio. Maybe a vintage typewriter. I have a vintage typewriter behind me that you can, well, you can't see it too well, but it doesn't work. So it's a little crazy to buy a vintage typewriter that doesn't work just as decoration. But there we go. That's my answer. A vintage
You know, especially when you're typing. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also crazy when you're writing four of your books using your thumb and phone. I
That's
mean,
right.
the vintage typewriter, I think, would actually be a step up.
Yeah.
What is your road trip snack that you always grab from the gas station?
I'm just a chip guy. I like a jalapeno chip. Although I try to be a little healthier. I like to I like to buy like cashews in a little bag of cashews. I'll tell you my healthiest of all though is sometimes at a gas station there's this company that makes little bags of pickles, right? They do pickled carrots, they do pickled green beans, regular dill pickles, and they sell them in these little easy packs that you can just little snack packs. And so I'll buy those sometimes on the road and snack on those. And that's a pretty healthy snack right there. Get some pickled green beans, go on down the road eating some pickled green beans, have a little Coke Zero there.
What was the favorite? What was your favorite thing from this book?
I really loved two things. I loved writing Colton's relationship with his rescue dog Petey. I thought that was a lot of fun. And just to reassure my readers, I put in two footnotes that Petey was not going to die because by the time you meet Petey, Colton's in rough shape. You could certainly see a dog dying on Colton in the shape he's in and the way his life is going. And Petey's in rough shape. So I said, I got to reassure my readers here. So I put two footnotes in. So I really enjoyed writing Colton's relationship with Petey. I thought that was very sweet and fun to write. And I also really loved writing Colton's relationship with Luann's twin daughters. Um, I thought that was a lot of fun. In my mind, that was a very cute, loving, sweet relationship.
And Jeff, what can our readers and listeners expect from you next?
Well, the way this year has shaken out, I actually have another book coming out in July. I have a YA novel in verse that I co-wrote with my friend Brittany Cavallero. It's called Sunrise Nights. It's another love story, and it comes out in July. I'm working on another YA verse novel with Brittany that's going to come out probably in 2026. And I just recently submitted to my editor the first portion of another book for the adult market that I, fingers crossed, hope she'll pick up and publish.
And Jeff, with that, what is the best way for our readers and listeners to keep up with you and find out what's going on?
Yeah, so the best way to do that is probably through my Instagram. That's my favorite social media platform, the one where I'm most active. It's just at Jeff Zentner, JeffZentner. I'm on Instagram. I'm not real active on Twitter, but I've got an update account there. I'm on Threads. I've got an author page on Facebook. I've got a website, www.jeffzentnerbooks.com. And the reason it's jeffzentnerbooks.com and not jeffzentner.com is because I bought the domain jeffzentner.com and I let it lapse. And I said, well, I mean, what's going to happen? Is somebody going to take it and turn it into a porn site? Well, that's exactly what happened. Somebody took it and turned it into a porn site. So don't go to jeffzentner.com, go to jeffzentnerbooks.com, and you can get information on my books and whatnot there.
Well, we definitely appreciate that warning. Want to make sure we go to the right site. But with that, also, we appreciate that you joined us today, Jeff. Really enjoyed talking with you, and our readers should definitely go out and pick up their copy of Colton Gentry's third act. But stick around for the happy hour with our other readers.
Thanks, everybody.